the mind can create abstractions that are beautiful and elegant and very compelling, but they can wreak immense havoc because they're by definition totally ungrounded and unconnected to the physical world.
Welcome to Back to the Future podcast. My name is Victor Sadia, and I talk with brilliant minds and hearts of people who want to uproot and transform the current health and wellness paradigm. Tiago Forte is a writer, teacher, and speaker specializing in productivity. As the author of Building a Second Brain and founder of Forte Labs, he blends design, technology, and personal growth to help individuals and organizations unlock creativity, efficiency, and intentional living. This episode delves into the intersection of creativity, somatic embodiment, and intellectual rationalization. Tiago challenges the dominance of the abstract mind, exploring the profound ways our bodies, emotions, and communities shape creativity and connection. He shares personal anecdotes about his evolution as a writer, the transformative power of in-person experiences, and his embrace of somatic practices like ayahuasca and breathwork. We also discuss the role of rituals in questioning individualistic narratives that isolate us from ourselves, others, and the environment, as well as our perspectives on Mexican and American identities in terms of collective belonging and attitudes towards life. Is writing an intellectual or a somatic experience? Like healing, it is certainly both. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Tiago Forte, right?
More or less.
More or less. Tiago Forte in Spanish.
It's
How are you?
hard to do the Portuguese accent.
Can you do it?
Tiago Forte.
Ah, beautiful. Yeah, you do it better. So yeah, tell me, I know you grew up with parents that were artists, and I think that's something that um, not a lot of people have that.
Mhm.
What did it mean to you back then when you were a child, and what does it mean to you now, knowing that you grew up in a house of artists?
Yeah, what a great question. It's funny, at the time it meant very little. Took it totally for granted. It's like, wait a minute, not every family has, gigantic 8-foot paintings of nude men and women on their walls of every wall of their house. That to me, that was totally normal. But as I get older, in fact, the older I get, the more it's unveiled how deep it went. Um, it's so many things, everything from a way of seeing the world, questioning things, seeing beyond the surface, seeing the meta level of things, seeing patterns and themes, and uh, and the history of things, the provenance, what that's referring to, what is that calling toward. So there's a lot of things like that. It's also just being being more cultured. We were very cultured, which I feel like is something that has been almost completely lost in the world. Like, what does that even mean? We spent just so much time every day, every week, looking at art, thinking about art, talking about art, and not only art, but music and food and literature and travel and sculpture, like every kind of medium, artistic medium you can think of. Um, but I think mostly it's a way of seeing. It's a really deep way of seeing and being present and questioning things and seeing things from different perspectives and seeing the world as your own creative medium, something that you are creating, you're crafting, you're authoring rather than something you're just receiving.
It's I think that we could use the same description to talk about many other archetypes, but I think the artist in that way of seeing, in that curiosity, goes beyond the intellectual of knowing things, but wanting to experience things, want to bring that into a felt sensation of being alive. And
Mhm,
I think that changes the whole approach.
mhm,
Its purpose is to bring the aliveness of life. It's to feel the aliveness. Um, do you think that yeah, did you get that as a child, or you weren't artistic in that way as a child?
Yeah, it's funny because I was the non-creative one. I was the black sheep because, my brother, my youngest brother was a dancer from 4 years old he was dancing. My other brother always had a talent for interior design and for architecture and building things. My mother was a singer, my dad was a painter, and so here's me over here, no drawing ability. I play the piano, but have no special talent. I did not, I basically I didn't have any particular clear artistic skill. I was the nerd. I was definitely the smart one, but also the nerdy intellectual one, the reader. I just constantly read. It took me many years to discover my creativity through writing. Through writing was really my medium.
And how was that? Like when you began writing, I think I read in Lauren's newsletter last night. I was awake until 4 a.m. and read her newsletter at 2 a.m. But I think she mentioned that you have been writing since you were 14 years old.
Yes, yeah. The first time I ever wrote was when we moved to Brazil. My mom was Brazilian, and when I was 14 and my siblings were younger, they moved us there. And I can remember we had our first laptop. It was like a compact, little, actually big black laptop. And we would have these incredible adventures around Brazil, just doing road trips. We would all pile into our little station wagon because it had no minivans in Brazil. So a family of six in a car made for five with my smallest brother just back there somewhere. And we would just go on these just incredible epic road trips throughout Brazil. And I just would write back letters, essentially, which were emails to our friends and family back home. And I remember it so distinctly because it was the first time that I wrote anything without being forced to, right? With no teacher being like, okay, write this thing. And it was also the first time that I got validation. I saw that, people would write back, our friends and family being like, these stories are wonderful, it sounds so fun. We love these. And so that is true. That was the earliest, like the very earliest signal that I had that, oh, I can just create something and people enjoy it.
And how was it for you? Like it was a way of communicating, or you felt that you were also beginning to grasp what it feels to create art?
I would say I was beginning to feel what it felt like to create art, but I think that the more accurate term is documenting. And in fact, I still see myself mostly as a documenter. I don't see myself as a storyteller. I don't think I'm very strong in storytelling and narrative. And I'm analytical, but I'm not like writing technical or scientific writing. Really, mostly what I'm doing, like usually my inspiration is always something happened, something unusual or special or important or interesting. And I'm just like, I've always had this feeling like, wait a minute, this has to be recorded. It has to be, it's almost like a historical impulse. Otherwise, it just gets lost. And it breaks my heart to have precious experiences and memories lost. And so whatever the medium is, I feel like I have to capture it.
Why is that? Why do you think that you need to be a documenter and a recorder? Like, yeah,
I don't know. I don't know exactly where well, I do know my mom is obsessed with genealogy, and maybe I caught that bug. She spent many years researching like the genealogy of all four branches of our family back to, I think in one case, like the 1600s in Europe. And so I always grew up, I think we grew up with the awareness and knowledge of our ancestors extraordinarily strong. Like we grew up hearing, it was like you might hear a story of an ancestor that lived in the 19th century or 18th century or 17th century, the same that you would hear a story about your cousin, that's alive today. So maybe that was one thing. And then I always read a ton of history. And I still find history just stranger than fiction. Like you go back and you read the things that happen, and you're just like, you couldn't make this up. It would be too weird and too unbelievable. And so I just find history this infinite well of interesting stories and fascinating insights and recurring patterns. And it also kind of baffles me how uninterested in history most people are. Most people sort of seem to not care that much about the past.
Yeah, I think this is a profound question of why do we feel that we need to record stuff, either for our own use or for recounting a story. Um, and I think in a sense it's also this game of orality and text in terms of writing, right?
Hmm.
What would happen with this conversation if we wouldn't have a microphone between us?
Hmm.
Or I've been reading your series about it's called, I think, A Quest for Self Knowledge, from self help to somatic healing, right?
Hmm.
And I know the part three is coming next week, but in a sense, I see this like self help. I see more like a structuring, writing thing of mirroring and analyzing, externalizing something that it's there and can be reflected back to us for self help purposes, for creation of identity or recreation of identity. But then the somatic, it's much more the experience. It's
Hmm.
the register goes to the body directly, not through the words,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Can you tell me about this arc of Tiago going from the head to the heart through writing and vulnerability and community, but now really wanting to embody the somatic experience of the of life?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a so the reason I'm writing that series is basically as like R&D for the book that I'm writing, which is kind of a my books have always had a kind of personal development angle, but this one is the most explicitly the one that's most explicitly about personal development. And so as I was writing it, I realized, wait a minute, I have to go back and actually even just figure out and tell to myself my own story, which I had never really, thought of as a story. And so I'm just writing that series. And the framework is part one, like you said, the head, and then the heart, and then the gut or the body. Um, which I think is, by the way, is a framework I learned from Joe Hudson, who's a great mentor and teacher of mine. He uses that framework almost as like an overarching structure to his work, which is very, very transformational and very profound. But I think it's kind of also a classic one. It's a, it's a, I don't know if it's a common one, but it's a classic path for smart people, right? Those of us who learn early on that, oh, I have something special in between the walls of my skull. We get awarded for it as kids. We get the grades or the teach, we're the teacher's favorite or the parents say, oh, you're the smart one. Something happens early on that we take on that identity. Oh, I'm smart. And that path is to start at the level of the intellect, the abstract, the conceptual, which is powerful, right? Like I think that's really important. It's not that the head is like lesser or it's something that you want to leave behind or it's, more basic. It's not. It's very powerful. But it's just one part of you. It's not the whole thing. And those of us who are smart, I think sometimes we keep doubling down on our mind again. And, we go to high school. Oh, now I'm the smart one. Then college and then grad school. And then we're in our job. And it just hits diminishing returns. And then I think eventually hits negative returns where you start investing so much time and attention and identity and value in your mind that the other parts of yourself actually kind of stagnate and wither and atrophy.
Yeah. And the body keeps the score, right? Like
Hmm.
at some point, your body catches up with you because the mind cannot solve the contradictions, the toxins, the trauma that it's part of every human life.
Yeah.
I think you need, or at least if you are lucky, you understand that mind will help, but won't be enough.
No. And that's what I found in my 20s, around my late 20s. I started noticing more and more and more. It was like the walls closing in as I realized that my intellect had real limits, and most of the stuff I most wanted in life, it couldn't, it couldn't even begin to deliver them to me. things like love and joy and presence and meaning and fulfillment, those things were out of reach as long as I was just a walking brain.
And you know exactly one of the things that I found is that the, the I lost the ability to enjoy things like
Mhm,
eating shrimp
mhm,
or what or I don't know, whatever activity. My body didn't know how to enjoy them. I did enjoy intellectual things
mhm,
like reading a poem, a good book, having a great discussion, learning something new. That's beautiful. But then the somatics of enjoyment, if I couldn't intellectualize and poeticize in my mind what this moment meant,
mhm.
I was aloof. I was away from the experience.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I found the same. I found the same. It's actually very depressing. It can be very depersonalizing, very alienating to like, say you understand everything about the brain and the neurochemicals and all the structures and everything, but you can't enjoy a flower in the garden. Well, what's the point of that?
That's the point. And I think, in a way, probably to extrapolate this, but I do believe that um, paradoxically or ironically, even the healing of the planet, with all the problems that we have with global warming and social stuff and war and all these things, we still believe that mind and and reason and words will heal.
Hmm.
But if we don't reconnect to this felt sensation of being like and it's funny because we're now technological, so it's like more like a techno animistic way of being in an enchanted world through the body, through nature, but now also through technology and the cyborgs that we have become. It's the only way to reconnect to the things that bind us and that make us feel secure so that we are not destroying everyone and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. The mind can create abstractions that are beautiful and elegant and very compelling, but they can wreak immense havoc because they're by definition totally ungrounded and unconnected to the physical world.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's one of the dangers, right? I know that you love this topic of, well, I don't know if you love it, but at least you are immersed in it, of artificial intelligence, and what you are the second brain guy, right? You're putting those ideas someplace so that they can be retrieved and used. Um, but the third brain, let's say the third brain, which is this somatic experiencing, this bodily thing, the microbiome, the intergenerational forces of our lineages that are traversing all the time, must be brought to the picture so that whatever we come up with uh, entails this our nature, which is to be biological, sensitive beings.
Yeah, we're animals.
We're animals.
It's
We're
such a
we're, we're
weird,
mammals. Yeah.
right? I mean, it's such a weird, that's something we've spent centuries distancing ourselves from, trying to forget. And yet here we are, our mammal bodies with our organs and our skin and our hearts, and it's I mean that's the current. So part three is kind of like my current frontier. And it's sort of me as a novice and me just being at the precipice of it. And I feel like it's such a foreign world. It's so foreign because frameworks break down, all concepts don't really have meaning, and even the heart can't. It's like emotions. I mean, this is the message of the book How Emotions Are Made, which I also summarized on my blog, is emotions are concepts. Emotions are interpretations and constructs that we use to interpret what? Bodily sensations. So I'm just like, I feel like I'm going down, down, down through deeper and deeper layers of reality. And the deeper I go, the more my current understanding and the filters through which I perceive the world just break down. And I have to just perceive or experience directly, which is uncomfortable.
Yeah. What are those activities that you've been afraid or you are afraid now of engaging on when your mind says, no, that's too dangerous, that's too ridiculous, that's not appropriate. Uh, but once you step into those um, undefined worlds or unexperienced worlds for you, the felt sensation, oh, yeah, yeah, this is exactly what I should be doing. Like,
Mhm.
what healing modalities, relational modalities have you played with in that sense?
Yeah, I would say that the main one is ayahuasca, which I tried for the first time a year ago, last October. Um, that was kind of, I almost feel like my initiation into this next stage because it was, well, I mean, we can get into that, but it was just so visceral. I mean, at one point I'm like down in the dirt, in on my hands and knees, just like really like an animal, just writhing and just like, moving my body and then of course throwing up and then like rolling around. It was like being a little like newborn little wolf pup or something. But there's a few others that I'm experimenting with. Breathwork is one. Um, I'm exploring, I, I could say only intellectually at this point, sex stuff, reframes or new ways of thinking of sex. I was famously kind of openly exploring the concept of polyamory on Twitter a few months ago, that which kind of went viral. Um, but the sex, I think, is one of them. I mean, that's like right at the bottom level or close to the bottom level. Um, I have a body worker that I work with in LA, or I did work with, not so much anymore now that we live in Mexico, which that's been another big thing is watching someone just work directly on what's going on in your body and seeing changes in my life as a result. I would say those are the main ones.
What about dancing?
It's a good one.
You like dancing?
I do, but I sense that there's more there to explore.
Yeah, yeah, for me too. And I believe that dancing by oneself, it's also a very powerful thing, which we usually don't think as one. But I've been doing it a bit more, and I find it beautiful. And how about when you're writing and then you start crying, right? I think that's a point where both worlds come together.
Hmm.
How much of your writing gets informed or knows it's on the right path because tears appear?
I would say like outright tears is rare, but feeling moved is common. In fact, if I get more than a page or two and I'm not moved, it's a pretty clear sign that I'm just going off in some wrong direction.
How long have you known that, like in your writing, that if you're not feeling weird or moved, uh, probably it's not the right thing? Is this something recent, or you encounter this, I don't know, how long ago?
Yeah, I think in a way it has always been. I think earlier on I would have called it more like curiosity, interest, excitement, fascination, things like that. I think because my writing career has always been self-directed. I was never like a journalist or someone writing for an external. I mean, it was an external audience, but not like this specific outcome that I'm trying to achieve. It was really for my own interest. I think I've always cultivated that. Um, but these days I'm finding, and the kind of writing I'm practicing is like this is the whole thing with self-help. I read self-help books these days, and they're just so bad. It's so bad, and I'm honestly entering this category with a lot of trepidation. I don't want to just add another book to the pile that is like superficial. Um, it's trying to get you to override your intuition and listen to the writer instead of your own self. It's overly simplistic. It's a lot of things that I don't like. I'm trying to find a way to really like Michael Singer. Michael Singer is the classic example, where you at least I read his writing and I feel like I'm getting like a direct transmission. There's something he's using very simple language and simple stories, but it's like I am changing somehow through reading his writing.
in the newsletter that you sent this morning, on the pitfalls of that we fall when we are creating or trying to create an annual review. On
Mhm,
number 6, you said making it a process instead of a ritual.
mhm,
Um, and you said ritual is a word that will make a few people squirm, right?
mhm,
But I think it's again the same thing. Like when we are being very analytic, uh, productive in the capitalistic way of all these things, the flavor goes away,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
And I think that not everyone makes talks openly about this, right? you
mhm,
you know you know a lot of creators, which I think they can get to some way of stagnation emotionally with what they're doing because it's working very well. Subscriber numbers are going up, but it feels very mechanistic.
mhm,
And there's a dilemma there, right? Because in terms of business, in terms of reputation, in terms of making achieving what you were supposed to achieve when you initiated the whole project, it's there. um, but then I think it comes a time where, well, probably the spark is not the same, and I
mhm,
need to pivot to a new identity. And that's something that
mhm,
I think a lot of creators might, if they probably, if they are smart enough and they're successful enough, they will hit that road. It's
mhm,
again, the body will keep the score.
mhm,
um, how in your ecosystem of creators this is being talked about,
mhm.
and how are you um, envisioning your evolution of your own identity?
Hmm. Yeah, it's something I'm very very much trying to figure out as we speak. Um, I was just talking to my coach last week about this. Um, partly partly out of necessity, which is the online business, which is the business, is really quite in a kind of stagnant or plateauing place. Um, and you see it across the board. Like subscribe, like you were saying, subscriber numbers are not up; they're down or they're flat. Revenue is down, profit is down. It's like almost every metric across the business is just like weakening and going down, which is really interesting. On the one hand, it's hard, but it's also kind of useful as a clear signal. And I'm actually talking to a lot of other entrepreneurs and creators, wondering to what extent is this just people really getting tired of the online world? You know, like it feels broader than just my business. In fact, everyone I talk to is seeing much the same trend. People are just like, it's too much, too many courses, too many webinars, too much content, too many emails. They're just like, they're over it. Um, the one clue I have, or the little lead is, when I look at everything I've done or have been doing recently, what has the most promise, what is exciting and what is interesting and what is alive, it's definitely in-person events. I haven't figured out a financial model to make them financially sustainable. That's probably the direction I'm going to explore is in-person experiences, intensive, immersive, experiential, interactive.
Yeah. What what do that mean would that mean in terms of your identity? Like it's interesting how you are talking now about, going to the somatic, and at the same time your work will be about the somatics of community.
Yeah, I think these events are actually part of my somatic work. I have to be totally present, and I mean, it's all happening there, in the flesh. I don't know how it's actually kind of funny because the way that my identity is changing that I can see is towards being primarily an author. There were times where I really explored, like really explored and tried to build this like big education business. We were going to have like this platform and all these courses, and we even started having courses from other instructors. And then I was like, oh, we're going to have like this whole roster of instructors, and then we're going to have like administrators, and we're going to have guidance counselors. Like we were going to build this big school. This was in the middle of the pandemic when everyone thought that the revenue would just keep going up. But then that very quickly ran into an identity blocker where I just realized, wait a minute, I have zero interest in being a school administrator. And then I tried, YouTube, and we're still doing YouTube, but I can see pretty clearly I'm not going to be like a YouTuber, like living and breathing YouTube all the time. I think writing books is the activity that is most in line with who I really am, at least of the ones that I've tried. Uh, but then I guess where the conflict is, and I'm just realizing this as I speak, is like the writerly lifestyle is very solitary. These long stretches, days and weeks of just nothing, just open schedule, very introspective, and it's kind of abstract and conceptual. That's a lot of what I'm writing. And I was just talking to Lauren a couple days ago, like I cannot figure out how I can have an author lifestyle and still run in-person events, which are like the very opposite of that. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I just an idea. I think that there's a way of writing where the crying happens, right? So, in a sense that, like for example, I go to these retreats, and I know that what I experience in the retreat, it's undescribable. Like when you are out of the retreat and you want to tell something what happened there, impossible to find the words, right? But then 2 weeks, 3 weeks in, the feeling of the retreat goes away, and you want to recall it, you want to call it back, you want to, and the only way to have it is or go into another retreat or try to write about the experience.
Mhm.
And what I'm seeing here is that the somatic experience can be the new muse for the writing instead
Mhm.
of books or abstract analysis and ideation, right? But rather
Mhm.
I went, I did, and then I told. And I think there's an identity there too.
Interesting. Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, my books are always based on courses because it's like to know what should go in the book to me, at least when it comes to productivity stuff, you have to try it. You have to teach it, you have to coach it, you have to see what problems people have. So, in person, whether it's courses or retreats or something else, would be an even richer, even more hands-on and kind of deep source of expertise.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think about my favorite authors, and I think they use that way rather than being in the world of books and ideas. They were fishermen, they were political activists, whatever, and from that they became poets and writers.
Hmm.
And they blended the world of fiction with the blend with the world of reality. And as you said, reality is stranger than fiction. And I think
Mhm.
there's a niche there in the self-help area and productivity area where your somatic experiences will enrich the arsenal of intellectual ideas that are there and are needed too.
Absolutely. Wow, that's super well put. When you put it that way, then it doesn't seem contradictory. It seems to be quite complementary.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And at the same time, it's like, yeah, I sometimes feel that way when I write, is that I want to convey or at least feel the feeling that I had when I was experiencing that experience,
Mhm.
knowing fully well that I won't be able to fully do it, right?
Mhm.
So that you don't. There's a famous quote by Fernando Pessoa, a Portuguese poet, that said, "Those who see others dancing also dance." And I
Mhm.
always loved that because it was like my idea of, well, I don't have to get up and dance because I know I can t- uh, see the beauty of these people dancing.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's also like not wanting to engage with the world
Mhm.
directly, right?
Mhm.
No, 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 no. To know how what it is to dance is to dance, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think it's
Beautiful.
beautiful to know that they are limits to each
Mhm.
art form or activity,
Hmm.
and just try to experience them all. And that's also an identity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, each one can only capture a certain aspect of experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. And also, uh, I'm like, oh, but I would love to have one activity that encompasses everything, right?
Yeah.
But no, I think that's one of the mysteries and the beauty of the world. It's like the whole world is contained in a drop, right? Uh, but it's not one specific drop. Every drop in the ocean contains the world.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. Tell me about yeah. Let's talk about marriage, the couple. Um, yeah, why? I'll put it this way. What are the somatics apart from sex? That's obvious. Of the couple going from the mind to the heart to the somatic.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Um, I think Lauren and I have made a lot of progress on that. Um, led in large part by her. I think she's been on a similar path, but she was always more at home in the heart and the somatic. And so she sort of almost led the way in some ways. But let's see. I mean, the thing that comes to mind is how we handle conflict and disagreement, which usually first surfaces at the mind level, which is a kind of a superficial level. You know, like you said, you were gonna. We had a fight recently, actually, about book writing because we're both writing books right now, which has been such an interesting challenge because we're kind of in the same mind state. You know, in the past I was the one, oh, I'm the artist over here and I'm suffering and doing my art and then I'll come to you for comfort and for balance, right? And now when I try to do that, she's like, don't come to me. I'm going through my own process. But there was something recently where I felt like I think I said something that kind of set her off, which is like I was like, you writing your book is making me writing my book less enjoyable and less fulfilling. And she was like, "What?" She really did not like that. Um,
In which sense did you say that? In the sense that you didn't have comfort anymore?
I think in the sense that, um, yeah, I guess it basically comes down to uh, that I can't really lean on her, whether for practical things, taking care of the meals or taking care of the kids, all the way to very, spiritual stuff, like just having someone to depend on or to comfort me or to encourage me. And in fact, it's her first book, and I have written multiple books. So in a way, she's having a harder time, and I'm needing to comfort her and support her and encourage her. Um, so I can't remember exactly. It's always difficult to recount how the fight played out, but I just noticed that we were able to not be triggered. We were able to just go down the levels so quickly, where by that evening, like within a few hours, we were able to really get to the heart of it, which is always the actual heart or the body. It's like the fears that are playing out, the scarcity that's playing out, the past. What this reminds me of from the past or from my childhood are all like very low level things. And it was actually funny how it ended up. We actually realized that we were jealous of each other. We were jealous of each other. I was jealous of her because um, she gets to write this book free of external constraints, free of external pressure. She doesn't have to sell a certain number of copies, doesn't have a business that it has to support, doesn't have an editor that is like demanding by a certain deadline. And so part of me is like, oh, like jealous of that and envious. Like I wish I could just create something free of constraints. And she's jealous of me because she was like, well, you have all this team to support you and you have an editor that is experienced and can, give you feedback and you have an audience that is waiting for this book. And so what was at the heart of our conflict was that we actually were envious of each other, which is pretty funny.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's exactly the somatic embodiment of the couple evolving as a couple, and I don't see it any other way, unless you just go into the superficial level of repeating the same patterns of who controls this, who controls that, and we don't get into each other anymore. Um, and this is something that I've been changing about my own narrative of what a long-term marriage is about, which is experiencing all the things that it brings rather than saying, oh, these are the good things that need to be experienced and these are the bad things, so let's do everything to avoid those. That's very obvious, obviously, but when I'm observing my marriage, and specifically when I'm in conflicts or in uncomfortable emotions, it's like, this is the beauty, this is the richness of marriage. No other situation or circumstance in my life would have can get me to this exact feeling, which is undescribable, right? And that's wow to see. Wow, this is so much complexity, so much interaction, so many conversation are traversing us. Some are knowable, some are unknowable. And I think that's just to say that when I described the marriage that way, it means I don't have to judge the situation. I don't have to judge the emotion. I don't have to say, oh, this is good or bad. This is desirable or not desirable. And it doesn't get easier, but in a sense, you say, yeah, what's the worst that can happen, right? And then you lean from that curiosity, artistic way of exploring things rather than just fulfilling the Disney story of what romantic love should look like.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. So true. Yeah. Yeah, I think I've I've come to see being triggered as some of the most important moments for growth. When you're triggered, there's a nerve being touched that is really revealing something about yourself, something you can't be with, something you can't feel, a mistaken assumption, a an aversion that is probably limiting you all over your life. And so if you see triggering as good, well then your wife, your spouse, and your kids in that case are your gurus. They're your teachers because they will teach you every single day what you are missing and what you're not allowing yourself to feel. It's like by design. That's their job practically.
Yeah, and that's one of the danger that I also see myself as an artist and want to keep building that identity. It's the only thing that worries me that I could very easily fall into, which is in the name of creating good art, you step onto your children and your wife, not only on the logistics of life, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically. You are swallowing their energy because your art is so great,
Yeah.
right? And that's I've sometimes done this when you expose something from your family because you know it will make great reading, and that's in the best case scenario transparent and vulnerable. In the worst case scenario is just using them and
Mm.
victimizing yourself and trying to expose them so that everyone can give you the reason, right, that you were right. Um, Open to the way to say, I'm enjoying my kids and I'm being a good parent or being a good lover because this is the best material for the best art. And that's also dangerous.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah, there's definitely pitfalls for sure. For sure. It's not a there's a whole unique set of pitfalls from being an artist that maybe you wouldn't face. Although I'm curious from something you just said, is it also possible that the need, the demand to create art does cause you to be differently as a parent or a spouse, but that it's better instead of worse.
Mm, great question. Obviously, it can go both ways. I would say the deal would be as the same way you're trying to be transparent as an artist and being
Hmm.
honest.
Hmm.
It's the same with those relationships. And if you're honest about that conflicting thing
Hmm.
with your relatives,
Hmm.
um, I think you're in a safer space.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah,
Like
yeah.
for example, I went to my sister's wedding this week, and I wrote a letter for her, which I read out loud for everyone, 150 people, right? And then I said, should I publish this online? Right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So this is great art. Everyone would enjoy that letter. But again, it's a thing, right? It's a thing there. And I think that I'm beginning to understand the power of keeping a few things for myself, not for anyone, and
Mhm.
a few things for my spouse and a few things for my children
Mhm.
with the same amount of honesty, but also of loyalty, is some sort of loyalty, right? Of this is something that it's so private, and because it's private, it's beautiful and it's sacred.
Yeah.
Once it's open, it's still beautiful, it's still art, but ah, you know,
Yes, I know what you mean. Yeah. Yeah, there's a few ways that can that can go wrong. Is like I think you can be too public about your family life. I mean, there's some influencers, their kids, their little kids are their whole thing, you know? And I find that really bad in most cases. Or another one is like where you create relationship advice, and so your relationships just become this like cast of characters to feed your content, right? I mean, like Taylor Swift comes to mind. Every boyfriend inspires an album, which then is her falling in love to break up story. So, yeah, there's a lot of ways that can be a little off. I don't feel like I run that temptation though too much. I think because my content is most of it is pretty practical. I think that's one way to kind of get around that. It's just like my family or like my personal life is not really the main. My lifestyle is not the main thing I'm selling. It appears here and there on the edges, but I try to focus on sort of like the how-to educational stuff.
yeah. Yeah, but I would add two things which I admire from you and Lauren. One is, yes, it's not that related, but when you bring these things, it's that you have enough trust in you and in her that you know that whatever you say, it's trying to understand better
Hmm.
rather than use it for something. And
Yeah.
I saw a video that you recorded with her on a terrace, I think, and she was telling you about all the things she feels about his YouTuber husband, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
From shame, from that's ludicrous and ridiculous, and I think that's very brave from you guys to do that, because it's yeah, it's a self-reflective process that you're still courageous enough to show that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and still you have conversations that you will never record, and that's
Yeah.
your intimate thing that you cherish and you hold. So it's a nice space, and for both, and two people who see themselves as artists or writers, it couldn't be the other way, right? You have to be open in those things, but also uh, keeping the private private.
Absolutely. It's a constant balancing act. There's no hard and fast rule, I think. Yeah.
Great. So one last question. Yeah, why don't you step in with a comment, a question, whatever.
Let me think. Well, I guess something I'm curious about is kind of a question that I've been thinking about that Lauren and I have been discussing, which is um, the nature of Mexican identity. Something we're really curious about because ostensibly the whole reason for coming here was it was very much was to impart a Mexican identity to our children. That's the years long project that we are on. And at first we just thought, oh, that's about speaking Spanish. And they are learning Spanish, but now I'm realizing, wait a minute, it's way deeper than that. There's a lot more to it. Um, and it's also hard to separate from, I also notice how many stories and narratives and filters I have as an American, where we have so many assumptions and preconceptions and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera about Mexico. And I almost have trouble setting those completely aside, even though I've actually spent a lot of time in Mexico. So I'm curious my question for you would be, what does it mean in 2024, especially as an artist, especially as a cosmopolitan person who knows the world, especially as a teacher and a entrepreneur? Like you share a lot of, you have a lot of the identities that I share and that I hope my children share. I'm curious, what does being Mexican have to do with those things, and what's important about being Mexican?
Yes, thank you. I was reminded when you moved here and you know you checked a few houses to live in, and there was this modern house, built 3 years ago, and they said I was looking more for the Mexican folkloric house, right? Because I want the full Mexican experience. But yeah, Mexico, as well as the whole world, has now genes and iPhones. So the Mexican identity, obviously, when you ask the question, I'd say I'm not qualified to answer it because I'm also a melange of identities. And but that's the same with everyone, right? It's impossible now to see what is the Mexican identity. Although what I will say, it's more from the eyes of, for example, that we are organizing congresses and conferences, and people come from other parts of the world and go to other conferences, and they give us feedback on how these conferences take place in Sri Lanka, in Australia, in the US, and in Mexico. And in that way, they see this flavor of the Mexican identity of being, um, in a way, and I think that's shared with Latin America overall, and you'd know because you were in Brazil, is this need to enjoy and
Mm,
this need to smile and to always have some sort of humor to live through whatever struggle there is in front of you, and also this feeling of, I think there's an inferiority complex also, in a sense.
mm, mm.
Yeah,
Say more.
that yeah that because we have been fed with basically the US globalized identity that we all need to follow, and because we have been colonized also,
Mhm.
both ancestrally and culturally in the last century. There's that feeling of, yes, we're great, we're fun, but probably we're not understanding the whole game as other people seem to understand it.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think that's it's painful in a way.
Not
Yeah.
understanding the game. Do you mean the like the game of capitalism?
Yeah. Yeah. Whatever game, we are good. We are good players. We know how to smile, to enjoy ourselves. We are productive. We have a rich country. But I think there's this gap where we believe that we are not enough at the end
Mm,
of the game. Yeah.
mm,
It's still something missing that we cannot fully appropriate, that our way of living it's okay and it's enough, and that's okay, right? I don't
interesting.
know. Obviously, this is a projection from my own life, but I see this, and there's a lot of writing about the. There's a very good book that wrote Octavio Paz. Probably you should check it out. It's called El laberinto de la soledad,
Hmm.
the labyrinth of solitude. It was written 70 years ago in 1950, but it describes the identity of the Mexican, and it's painfully um, uh, current, contemporary. Yeah,
Interesting. Wow. I'll check that out.
yeah. He's a Nobel Prize winner, so he's also a good writer.
You know, what's so interesting about that though is a lot of what you're saying reminds me of Brazil too. In Brazil, everything that is from el exterior is better, no matter where it's from. It can be from Argentina, from Chile, from Europe, from Asia. Is if it's not Brazilian, then it must be better. I always notice. But something I'm curious too. This is one of the things that's been maybe most like surprising, I guess, is the spirit of optimism and progress in this place. I don't know how much of that is Valle or the people that were around, but Lauren and I have been kind of half joking that living here right now feels so much like living in the US in the 90s. It reminds us of the 90s. It's like progress, optimism, things are getting better. You know, technology is cool. It's like we feel like we've been transported pa back in some ways to what was a very optimistic time in the US. So how do those two things square? Like,
Did you feel this when you lived in Mexico City a few years ago?
yeah,
The same?
yeah, but stronger now, it seems like.
Yeah, well, I think it's a sample selection bias in a
Mm,
sense that in Valle, people who are here, they're newcomers, they are pioneers. They came here because they have a new dream, right, of building a life different than what they started their life with. And but when I go to the city, I don't feel that. I feel like traffic and politics and people are not very optimistic. But it's difficult to generalize on these things.
mm,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Because, we had election year this year and this is a lot of polarization and not, the Latin American problem of being so dual in terms of socioeconomic, um, you know, uh, how do you say, classes.
hmm
In Latin America, it's poignantly, it's so there, it's so normalized
hmm
and it's so pervasive and it's so dangerous because the numbers are really uh, yeah, staggering, right? Like the rich are super rich and the poor are super poor and there's no in between.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's yeah.
I wonder how much of it too is maybe Lauren and I are contrasting with the US right now, which is at an absolute low point in terms of societal, cohesion, maybe compared to that. It's like,
Yeah, yeah. In that sense, I do believe that Mexicans have that zest, which is we are more community. Yeah, we think of ourselves more in a community, family community thing than individualistically.
yeah,
That's very marked too. Yes, that's a good reading, and I think that the U.S. is the other extreme, right? It's like so individualistic that people get scared when they see the power of community and they feel it. It's like this is a feeling that probably not many people had, right?
yeah,
Yeah. And the statistics on how loneliness is killing people and sickening people, it's also staggering, right?
yeah. It is. It is. I almost wonder, what, in fact, this is something I've always kind of felt or wondered my whole life was to what extent Latino culture could teach or contribute something to the US that would be a kind of antidote to that isolation and loneliness and kind of hyper individualism. Because in my own life, I always felt that anytime I was too in my American identity and things started to get a little, what is it? It's too isolated, too alienated, too efficient, too logical, too impersonal. That my salvation from honestly just like nihilism and depression was to lean into my Brazilian identity, where it's all about communal and meaning and fun and enjoyment, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah, and yeah, I think it's beautiful to narrate this but I also believe in the power of the somatic and the body and the collective body, where once you experience it, even though in your own lifespan didn't have that, your bones and your cells and your genes know that this is what brought us here since times immemorial, right?
Yes.
So, and I told you about the congresses that we do. It's like you create the container and this just happens, even if you're in the most individualistic space,
Hmm.
because it's encoded. It's encoded, right? The mind will say, no, 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 whatever, don't go, or go just because this is a transaction and you'll get his business card or whatever. But once you shake someone's hand or you see someone in their eyes, this is the language of mammals, and that's not going anywhere. So I do hope that gender politics and identity politics and all these isms that we have created, again, we won't be solved through how do you say in English, uh, 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 um, affirmative action and
Hmm.
laws,
Hmm.
but just by sitting together in a circle and laughing and dancing and doing the somatic things.
Hmm.
It's much more important. It's crazy how they go to the UN and they discuss about this discrimination and xenophobia and all these things to create laws and to create beautiful words around these things. But these guys don't share a meal together, right?
Hmm.
Don't hug, don't walk in the park together, don't invite them to their house for
Hmm.
bread.
Hmm.
That's basically what diplomacy should be about, not only getting to 10 pages agreements.
Wow, it's so true. So true. Yeah, I hope to do either our next summit or a retreat in Mexico next year. Because I feel like we can sort of fuse the culture of here with the American culture that we bring in, maybe a little bit of Brazilian, and teach some of these things in a way at a somatic level, where it's not teaching through a curriculum, but through experience.
Yeah, yeah. I would love to be part of that design team. I have a few ideas, and again, it's just a matter of also revealing, as you said, my in-person conferences is part of my somatic work. So whatever is intuitive for you, for your body, will work.
Mhm,
So yeah, just take a risk, take the leap.
mhm. All right, I'll be calling you soon.
Yeah, yeah, my friend. We'll be dancing together. Well, thank you, my friend. I one of the things that I was surprised since I met you is your ability to listen.
Mm,
When I talk to you, I always feel that I talk too much and that I should listen to you more. And you say, no, 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 it's been okay, right? So thank you for making me feel comfortable and also for listening and for creating space, so that Tiago is there, but it's also the other person. And at the same time is I see that you are not fully formed and that you're still creating who you are.
mhm,
So your silence means that you are still defining
mhm.
what Tiago should say because he doesn't know yet. And I think that's
Mm,
beautiful.
love that. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful compliment.
Thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Victor.
Thank you. I'll see you soon.
Okay.
Ciao.
Bye bye.